No one remembered when Miriam Holloway had first arrived in the town of Blackwood Ridge. There were no photographs of her moving truck, no newspaper clipping welcoming a new resident, no neighbor who could clearly recall the day she appeared. It was as if she had always been there, standing crooked at the edge of memory, like a shadow people noticed only when it moved. She lived in the last house on Crow's Bend Road, where the asphalt cracked and gave way to dirt. The house sagged low into the earth, its porch warped and bowed like tired shoulders. Wind chimes made from bones and rusted metal clinked softly whenever the air stirred, though no one ever admitted to hearing them unless they were already halfway past the property. Miriam was old. That much was obvious. Her back bent forward as if pulled by invisible strings, her gray hair hung in thin, lifeless strands, and her eyes unsettled people most of all. They were pale, almost colorless, and yet they seemed to see too much, lingering on faces longer than comfort allowed. Children were warned to stay away from her house. Parents never explained why. They didn't have to. Fear passed easily in Blackwood Ridge, slipping from one generation to the next like an heirloom no one wanted but everyone carried. The first disappearance happened in late October when the trees were stripped bare and the nights arrived early. Evan Carter was 17, restless and reckless in the way small towns often produced. He'd grown up hearing rumors about Miriam Holloway, about curses and whispered words and things buried in her backyard. But to him, she was just another story meant to scare kids into obedience. On a dare, Evan rode his bike down Crow's Bend Road after sunset. He never came home. Search parties scoured the woods, combed the creek beds, and questioned everyone who lived within 10 miles. They found Evan's bike abandoned near Miriam's fence, its chain twisted and snapped like it had been wrenched apart by force. No footprints led toward the woods, only toward the house. The sheriff knocked on Miriam's door the next morning. She answered slowly, leaning heavily on a cane carved with strange symbols. She smiled at him, a thin, brittle expression that never reached her eyes, and said she hadn't seen the boy. Her voice was calm, too calm. There was no evidence, no warrant. The sheriff left with nothing but a lingering sense of unease he couldn't quite explain. That night, Miriam went into her basement. The stairs creaked beneath her weight as she descended into the darkness, carrying a lantern that cast trembling shadows across the stone walls. The air grew thick with the scent of damp earth and something sharper, iron perhaps, or old blood. Along the walls hung hooks, dozens of them. They were not ordinary hooks. Each one was different, twisted and bent into unnatural shapes, forged from blackened metal etched with symbols that seemed to shift when the light hit them just right. Some were long and curved like claws. Others were short and barbed, cruel in their simplicity. At the center of the basement stood a wooden table stained dark with age. Upon it lay a bundle wrapped in cloth. Miriam set the lantern down and began to unwrap it with trembling fingers. A lock of hair spilled free first, dark, matted, unmistakably human. She whispered words under her breath, syllables that scraped against the walls like insects. The hooks began to tremble, vibrating softly, answering her call. Black magic was not something Miriam had discovered late in life. It was something she had inherited, something passed to her by a mother who had learned it from a woman whose name history had erased. The rituals were old, older than the town, older than the road that led to her door. Every hook had a purpose. Hooks for memory, hooks for pain, hooks for binding souls that refused to rest. Evan Carter's hook was nearly complete. By morning, Blackwood Ridge would feel it. The town woke with a heaviness it couldn't shake. People moved slower, spoke less, and avoided eye contact. Dogs whined at nothing. Birds refused to land near Crow's Bend Road. By afternoon, another rumor spread. Someone had seen Evan. A woman swore she saw him standing at the edge of the woods, his face pale and hollow, his eyes fixed on Miriam's house. When she called his name, he turned and vanished. That night, a knocking echoed through Blackwood Ridge, not on doors, inside walls, faint at first, rhythmic, like metal tapping against wood. People lay awake in their beds, hearts pounding, telling themselves it was pipes or animals or imagination. But deep down, they knew better. In her basement, Miriam smiled. The hook worked. And it was only the beginning. By the time the second week of November crept over Blackwood Ridge, the town's unease had deepened into something tangible. A weight that pressed against the chest and whispered through dreams. People spoke in hushed tones, avoided each other on the street, and hurried past the Holloway house without looking up. Even the bravest teenagers no longer dared to dare one another near Crow's Bend Road. Evan Carter's disappearance had been a warning, and everyone understood it, though none dared speak it aloud. Miriam Holloway moved through her home with the precision of a surgeon, her movements deliberate, her fingers tracing invisible lines in the air as though summoning forces beyond comprehension. She had begun a new set of hooks, smaller this time, delicate and cruel, each designed to latch onto fears, regrets, and secrets people didn't even know they carried. By the time they were finished, the town would be hers in ways no one could resist. It started subtly. The first was Mrs. Caldwell, a woman known for her stern demeanor and perfectly manicured lawn. She awoke one morning with her reflection warped, her image in the mirror twisting like smoke. She screamed, clutching at her face, seeing not herself, but a woman with hollow eyes and an impossible smile standing behind her. By the next day, she refused to leave her house, whispering to anyone who dared ask that they were coming, though she never specified who. Then it was Mr. Thompson, the postman. He had been delivering mail for 30 years and prided himself on knowing every resident. One evening, he reported hearing scratching inside the letters, faint metallic taps that seemed to echo the hooks from Miriam's basement. By the time he returned home, he was gaunt, silent, and shaking. His hands would not hold the mail properly. He dropped envelopes repeatedly, staring at them as if they contained truths too horrible to read. That night, he vanished. The town grew restless and rumors festered like an infection. Blackwood Ridge whispered the name Holloway with trembling lips, though no one dared accuse her openly. The children whispered stories they didn't understand, tales of hooks appearing in walls, shadows that moved when no one watched, and voices calling their names from the woods. Some woke screaming, and no parent could explain why. Miriam's basement became a cathedral of her intent. Hooks swayed gently from the ceiling, some hooked into the stone walls, others lying flat on the floor, each humming with a silent, sinister rhythm. She moved among them, selecting each with care, sometimes speaking the same low words she had murmured for decades. With every chant, the hooks vibrated, stretching invisible threads into the town above, threads that pulled at memories, at fears, at the very essence of those who lived there. One evening, the sheriff, Daniel Pierce, returned to Miriam's house. He had avoided her for weeks, but the growing number of disappearances forced him to confront what the town had feared for too long. The door opened before he could knock. Miriam stood in the doorway, leaning on her cane, her face unreadable but her eyes. Her eyes burned into him like coals. He noticed the faint smell of iron in the air, the quiet hum of something mechanical yet alive. "Sheriff," she said softly. Her voice carried no warmth but an eerie calm. "You're here because you care too much, or perhaps because you can't help yourself. Either way, you're welcome." He stepped inside cautiously. The house smelled of dust, herbs, and decay. Shadows clung to corners as if hiding, yet constantly shifting, watching. Miriam guided him through the narrow hallway, speaking little. In the basement, the lantern cast grotesque shadows across the hooks. The sheriff noticed immediately they were different from the first set. Smaller, sharper, hung with precision. Some glinted as though wet, catching the light with a disturbing sheen. "These," he began, but she raised a hand. "They do not belong to the living," she said. "They are for what refuses to sleep." Her eyes glinted. "Do you see them, Sheriff? They are patient. They wait. And when I am done, there will be nothing but silence." He swallowed hard, a chill crawling up his spine. He wanted to leave, but the floorboards seemed to resist his steps, groaning with the weight of something unseen. The air grew colder, the shadows darker. The sheriff felt the pull in his chest, a subtle tug at his thoughts, and for a moment his own fears stared back at him with perfect clarity. Suddenly, the hooks trembled violently. A high-pitched ringing filled the basement, and he could feel the threads wrapping around his mind, tugging at memories he had buried, regrets he had long ignored. He staggered back, nearly falling. Miriam's face remained calm, even amused, as if witnessing a child flinch at the first touch of a cruel game. "The first one resists," she whispered. "The others will follow willingly." Sheriff Pierce realized then that the horror of Miriam Holloway could not be confronted with law or reason. Her hooks were not merely metal. They were extensions of her will, vessels for her ancient, terrible craft. And the threads had already begun to weave into him. He left the house without a word, driving through the fog that had crept over Blackwood Ridge like a living thing. In the distance, the Holloway house loomed, darkened windows reflecting no light, as if the night itself feared to enter. By morning, the town's unease had deepened further. Whispers told of screams in the woods, of lights flickering in the Holloway windows at impossible hours, and of shadows that moved against the wind. People slept with knives under pillows, candles at every corner, and doors locked. But even these measures felt useless. Miriam Holloway smiled in her basement. She had begun a new layer of hooks, smaller than before, sharper than ever, designed to find those who thought themselves safe. They would creep into homes, slip into dreams, and reach for the darkest corners of hearts. And when they reached, they would hold tight, unrelenting. Evan Carter's eyes appeared in the shadows once more, pale, hollow, warning, yet unable to speak. He was the first, but he would not be the last. The hooks had chosen, and Blackwood Ridge had been marked. By mid-November, Blackwood Ridge felt like a town caught in the slow descent of a nightmare. Streets seemed narrower, houses closer together, and shadows longer, curling against walls even when the sun shone. People moved with nervous glances over their shoulders. Even the bravest teenagers avoided Crow's Bend Road. And yet the whispers persisted, each one louder, sharper, like tiny claws scratching at the minds of those who dared think they were safe. Miriam Holloway's power was spreading. The hooks in her basement had multiplied. Dozens now hung from the ceiling like a forest of twisted, blackened teeth. They resonated with an unseen energy, vibrating faintly, responding to emotions and memories. She had begun what she called the silent binding, a network of hooks designed to infiltrate the dreams of every soul in Blackwood Ridge. Each hook was patient, biding its time, ready to strike when fear or regret made the victim most vulnerable. That evening, as the sun bled crimson behind the ridge, Sheriff Daniel Pierce found himself drawn back to the Holloway house. He told himself it was curiosity, but deep down he knew he had been called. Fear gnawed at him, but he could not resist the pull of what he did not understand. He approached the crooked house, lantern in hand, noticing the subtle, almost imperceptible tremor of the wind. Shadows seemed to ripple across the walls as if the house were breathing. Inside, the air was thick and metallic. The basement door groaned as he descended, and the hooks swayed, whispering in unearthly tones that slithered around his mind. He tried to focus on Miriam, but she had disappeared. The lantern illuminated the walls, and he saw it, hooks embedded in the stone, dripping a dark liquid that shimmered like oil, pulsating with life. They were no longer inert metal. They seemed almost sentient, reacting to his every movement. A sound echoed behind him, a soft, deliberate tap, like fingernails rapping against wood. He spun, heart hammering, but saw nothing. Then another tap, closer this time, followed by a whisper he could not understand, curling around his ears like smoke. He realized with a sickening certainty that the hooks were not just in the basement. They were everywhere. He could feel them in the walls, in the floorboards, reaching for him, reading his memories, tugging at his fears. Suddenly, the lantern flickered and went out, plunging him into darkness. Panic clawed at him as he felt the first touch, cold, metallic, curling around his wrist. He tried to pull away, but it was too late. A hook, long and curved, had sunk itself into the flesh of his arm, though no blood appeared. Instead, an icy pain spread through his veins, and images flooded his mind. Faces he had failed, words he had left unsaid, regrets that had eaten at him for decades. And then he heard her voice, Miriam Holloway, soft, deadly, echoing around him. The first binds the second. The second binds the third. And soon all will belong to me. He stumbled backward, desperate, but more hooks emerged, looping from ceiling to walls to floor, forming a cage of black iron around him. The hooks whispered his deepest secrets aloud, mocking him in voices he recognized yet could not place. Each confession he had buried, every lie he had told, every fear he had ignored, Miriam knew them all. Outside, the town's unease escalated. Lights flickered in homes as if struggling against some invisible weight. Pets howled at shadows. Windows rattled with knocks from unseen hands. And in the woods, figures moved, children who had vanished, their eyes empty, their mouths twisted into silent screams, circling the Holloway property like predators. Inside the basement, Sheriff Pierce realized the horrifying truth. Miriam Holloway did not simply haunt the living. She harvested them, reshaping their fears into hooks, binding them to her will. Each victim became a tool, a sentinel, an echo of her power. And the hooks were patient. They waited for the moment of weakness, the flash of guilt, the breath of terror to strike and weave the victim permanently into her growing network. He fought, struggling against the hooks, and in that struggle he glimpsed the faces of all those she had claimed. Evan Carter, Mr. Thompson, Mrs. Caldwell, frozen in silent agony, their eyes hollow, reaching from the shadows, warning him, pleading for release. But escape was impossible. The hooks had learned him. They had him already. Then Miriam appeared in the darkness as if stepping from a shadow of the shadows themselves. Her presence was calm, terrifyingly serene. "You resist," she whispered. "But resistance is the first mistake. Fear, guilt, shame, these are my instruments, and soon, Sheriff, you will play perfectly." Pierce screamed, a sound swallowed by the darkness as a hook curled around his throat. Images of his past, the mistakes, the failures, the regrets, assaulted him like shards of ice. And in that instant he understood Blackwood Ridge was already lost. The hooks had chosen. The town would bend, and Miriam Holloway's web was just beginning. The basement fell silent, but the hooks continued their patient sway, readying themselves for the next phase. Outside, the town's residents shivered in their beds, unaware that the threads of terror were reaching into their homes. Dreams would be haunted, reality twisted, and soon no one in Blackwood Ridge would feel safe again. And in the Holloway house, the aged woman smiled, her eyes reflecting the pale glint of the hooks, knowing that with every secret unearthed, every fear exploited, her power grew stronger, and nothing, not law, not reason, not courage, could stop it. By the end of November, the air in Blackwood Ridge had grown thick, as if the town itself were breathing through a lung clogged with dread. Every street corner, every alley, every cracked sidewalk seemed to hum with a silent, unseen presence. Windows rattled without wind. Doors creaked when no one entered. Children woke screaming, clutching their blankets as shadows twisted unnaturally on their walls. Miriam Holloway had advanced beyond simple hooks. Her craft had grown. She no longer needed the basement alone. Her magic had begun to weave itself into the very bones of the town. Shadows leapt across rooms. Whispers seeped from walls. Even the ground beneath the town seemed aware, murmuring faintly to those unfortunate enough to hear it. She had begun her most intricate creation yet, the binding web, a network of hooks, threads, and spirits designed to ensnare the entirety of Blackwood Ridge. No one could leave, no one could hide. The hooks had grown clever. They mimicked voices of loved ones, called names from the darkness, and revealed secrets people never confessed until terror made them pliable. It started subtly with small misfortunes. Lights went out in homes. Objects moved without explanation. Whispers slipped through keyholes. Then came the disappearances. Mrs. Langley, who had been walking her dog, vanished from her porch. The dog returned, but she was gone. Mr. Whitmore, the grocer, was discovered days later, pale and unresponsive, repeating his own secrets aloud as if forced by some invisible tormentor. And then the children began to vanish. One by one, they disappeared in the night, leaving only small shadows that seemed to linger in corners or toys placed perfectly at the edges of beds as if waiting for someone to notice. Parents screamed, ran through the foggy streets, but the fog thickened, hiding Miriam's presence and confusing the desperate cries for help. The sheriff, Daniel Pierce, had grown obsessed. He spent every hour trying to uncover the truth, trying to reach the people who had vanished or were trapped in terror. But the more he searched, the more he understood the magnitude of what he faced. Miriam Holloway's magic was old, so old it predated Blackwood Ridge itself. The hooks were not mere tools. They were extensions of her soul, each carrying fragments of every life she had ever touched. Every lost soul strengthened her, made her presence more absolute, more inescapable. Pierce found himself returning to her house again and again, drawn like a moth to a flame. The Holloway home was always darker than the night itself. The wind moaned through the broken windows. The lanterns flickered as if alive, casting shadows that darted and lunged toward him. The basement door stood open now, as if inviting him, daring him to descend into its horrors. And he did. The hooks had grown more grotesque. Some were fused into the walls, dripping with a black, viscous substance that smelled faintly of iron and rot. Others hung from the ceiling, swinging as if breathing. Shadows clung to every surface, sometimes forming the twisted shapes of people Pierce had known, people who had disappeared, Evan Carter among them. Their eyes were empty yet piercing, as if accusing him of some unknown crime. Miriam emerged from the shadows, no longer leaning on her cane. Her back remained bent, her hair gray and lifeless, but her presence was immense, almost monstrous in its quiet, deliberate power. "Do you see now?" she whispered, voice low and echoing. "Do you understand why they fear me? Why they cannot escape? Fear is the foundation, regret is the mortar, and the hooks are eternal." Pierce felt a tug at his chest, the familiar thread of the hooks wrapping around his memories, his fears, his guilt. Every failure he had ever committed pressed against him like a living weight. He fell to his knees, gasping, as visions assaulted him. Faces twisted in agony, shadows crawling across ceilings, voices chanting in perfect, terrible unison. And then Miriam spoke again, her voice now carrying the resonance of countless souls she had bound. "You resist, Daniel, because you believe you are strong, but strength is illusion. Every secret, every fear, every regret, I will bind it, and soon you will become part of my web." He tried to scream, but the hooks had already ensnared him, lifting him slightly off the ground, cold iron biting into his flesh without leaving a mark. The walls themselves seemed to close in, the basement expanding impossibly, a labyrinth of darkness and hooks. Shadows formed into shapes he recognized, friends, neighbors, the children who had vanished. They reached for him with hollow eyes, whispering names he had called in anger, secrets he had told in shame. Miriam circled him, slow, deliberate, each step echoing like the toll of a bell. "The town is mine," she murmured. "Every secret, every sin, every fear will be woven into my creation. You cannot fight it, you cannot leave it. Blackwood Ridge is mine, and I am eternal." Outside, the fog had thickened to nearly impenetrable density. People dared not look out their windows. Every street corner seemed alive, pulsating with a quiet, dreadful intelligence. The Holloway house pulsed with a dark light, as if breathing. Inside, the basement had become a cathedral of horror, hooks swaying, pulsing, whispering. Daniel Pierce screamed in the darkness, caught in the silent, perfect control of Miriam Holloway as the shadows of the town seemed to gather at her command. By midnight, Blackwood Ridge had changed. The town itself felt alive, complicit in the horror, an extension of Miriam's will. The vanished children and adults were no longer missing. They were present in some horrifying, altered state, their forms twisted, their eyes empty yet fully aware, serving as extensions of her growing network. And at the center of it all, Miriam Holloway smiled, knowing that she had become more than mortal, more than legend. She had become the nightmare itself. December arrived in Blackwood Ridge like a slow, suffocating fog. The air was heavy, the sky a bruised gray that never seemed to clear. Silence had fallen over the town during the day, an unnatural hush that pressed against the ears. People whispered behind locked doors, peeking through curtained windows, but they saw only shadows, their own reflections twisted in ways that made them flinch. No one dared go near Crow's Bend Road. The Holloway house pulsed with life, dark, terrible life. Its crooked roof seemed to sag even further under the weight of something ancient, unseen. Inside, Miriam Holloway moved among her hooks like a conductor commanding a silent orchestra. Threads of shadow and iron extended from the basement, threading through walls, doors, and floors, seeping into homes, curling into beds, hiding beneath pillows, creeping along floors, sliding into ears while the residents slept. Every secret, every fear, every shame was being pulled, woven into her ever-expanding web. The sheriff, Daniel Pierce, had not returned home for weeks. He was somewhere between obsession and madness, driven by the knowledge that he alone could see what Miriam had become, though he had no means to stop her. He had begun to notice patterns in her hooks, their placement, their rhythm, the faint vibrations in the walls. Each hook resonated with a person's deepest fears, each thread a conduit for their suffering. And each thread strengthened her, feeding her, growing her influence until the town itself seemed to obey her will. That night, the town erupted with unseen terror. Doors slammed shut by themselves. Windows shattered without wind. Faint cries of children echoed down empty streets. Shadows moved independently of any light source, and at the Holloway house a new ritual had begun. Miriam had placed her most elaborate hooks yet, a massive lattice of black iron, each etched with symbols older than the town itself. Suspended in the lattice were the trapped forms of the missing, twisted, half-real, half-shadow, their eyes hollow but burning with silent anguish. Pierce entered the house one last time, driven by desperate courage. The air inside was thick, metallic, and suffocating. Hooks swung gently as if breathing, vibrating in harmony with the terror that had been funneled into them. He descended into the basement, lantern in hand, only to find the lattice looming over him like a cathedral of nightmares. The shadows within it shifted, forming familiar faces. Evan Carter, Mrs. Caldwell, Mr. Thompson, the vanished children, all watching, waiting. Miriam's voice emerged from the darkness, calm, precise, and utterly horrifying. "You see now, Daniel, you understand why they fear me. You understand why they cannot resist. Fear is fuel, regret is the key, and the hooks never sleep." Pierce tried to step forward, but the lattice seemed to pulse in response, sending threads snaking toward him. Hooks latched onto his arms, his legs, wrapping him in cold iron that bit into his flesh without breaking skin. Images assaulted him, failures, betrayals, regrets magnified to unbearable intensity. He cried out, but the voices of the trapped multiplied, whispering secrets he had never shared aloud, every shame exposed. Miriam emerged, stepping from the shadows as if the darkness itself had birthed her. "You resist," she said softly. "But resistance is the first step into despair. You will join them willingly or not. The hooks are patient, they wait, and they always claim what is meant to belong to me." Pierce's eyes darted around the basement. The lattice shifted again. Shadows stretched, forming shapes that had never been there, figures clawing at walls, reaching out, whispering in unison. He realized the horrifying truth. The hooks were not just extensions of her magic, they were extensions of the souls she had claimed. Each victim amplified the lattice, increased its reach, and whispered its pain into the ears of the living. Outside, the town trembled under her influence. People screamed from their homes, doors locked from the inside, but the threads of Miriam's power invaded every space. Children called to parents who were not there. Shadows fell across floors and ceilings, moving against logic. The fog that hung over Blackwood Ridge thickened, concealing the movements of those trapped by her magic. Inside the Holloway house, Pierce struggled against the hooks, but they were relentless. He realized that strength or will alone could not free him. Only understanding, only surrender to the rules of her dark craft might allow him to survive. And then Miriam whispered, her voice wrapping around his mind, "You will not fight, you will see. And then you will understand why fear is eternal, why the hooks are eternal, why I am eternal." A cold, metallic thread coiled around his mind, dragging him into visions he could not resist. His failures, his guilt, his fear magnified by the lattice. He saw the town consumed, every soul bending to her will, every secret extracted, every fear harvested. He screamed, but the lattice only pulsed, feeding, growing. And as the first tendrils of dawn crept over Blackwood Ridge, the Holloway house remained dark, alive, breathing. Miriam Holloway stood at the center of her creation, smiling, knowing that nothing in the town was untouched, nothing would escape, and soon all who remained would be bound by the hooks, body, mind, and soul. The dawn that broke over Blackwood Ridge was pale, thin, and lifeless. The fog that had blanketed the town for weeks still clung stubbornly to the streets, muffling sound and hiding the horrors within. For those who dared leave their homes, the silence was absolute, too absolute. The town itself seemed to hold its breath, as if aware of the final act that was about to unfold. Inside the Holloway house, Miriam Holloway moved among her hooks like a queen surveying her kingdom. The basement had become a cathedral of black iron and shadows, a latticework of torment in which every lost soul in Blackwood Ridge was trapped, twisted, and suspended. The victims' faces stared blankly, eyes hollow, yet burning with unspoken warnings, a silent testament to the terrible reach of her craft. Sheriff Daniel Pierce was among them, or rather, he was still fighting, still resisting, though every ounce of his will was being tested. The hooks coiled around his limbs, threads of black iron biting into him without drawing blood, tugging at memories, regrets, failures. He fell to his knees, chest heaving, mind caught in a storm of visions that threatened to consume him entirely. "You resist," Miriam whispered, her voice calm, deadly, echoing like wind over gravestones. "But resistance is fleeting. The hooks are eternal. Fear is eternal." "And so am I," Pierce tried to speak, tried to call out to the people of the town, but his voice cracked under the strain of the visions. Faces of children he had failed to protect, friends he could not save, the neighbors who had vanished, all of them appeared in the lattice, whispering, screaming silently, pulling at his mind with invisible hands. Every memory, every guilt, every hidden fear became a thread in Miriam's web, linking him to the lattice. And then he understood. Escape was impossible. Resistance only made the threads tighter, the hooks sharper, the lattice stronger. Only by surrendering to the rules of her terrible magic, could he survive even partially as part of her creation. Miriam circled him, her thin gray hair brushing against hooks that swung gently from the ceiling. "Do you see now, Daniel?" she asked. "Do you understand the cost of fear, the cost of secrets, the cost of a town unwilling to face what lurks in the shadows?" He did. The town had been bound to her, every soul feeding her, strengthening her, shaping the lattice into a living web of torment. Blackwood Ridge had become her creation, her power manifest, and there was no force on earth that could sever it. Outside, the fog began to rise higher, coiling through the streets and alleys like a living thing. Windows rattled, doors slammed. Shadows lunged from walls, mirrors, floors, moving independently of any light source. The people of Blackwood Ridge were trapped, unaware, yet fully aware in the most terrifying sense. Their fears, their secrets, their regrets were being harvested, twisted, and woven into hooks that would never release them. Inside the basement, Pierce felt the hooks tighten further, their whispers echoing in unison. "We are eternal. We are hers. We are the fear you cannot escape." The lattice pulsed, resonating with the collected agony of decades of terror. And then, with deliberate calm, Miriam touched the top of the lattice, and a wave of invisible energy swept through the basement. Every hook quivered, every shadow shifted, and the trapped souls collectively shivered, submitting completely. Pierce realized then that Miriam Holloway had become more than a mortal woman. She was the embodiment of the town's fear, the vessel of its guilt, the queen of every secret, every regret, every hidden terror. The hooks were not merely tools, they were extensions of her being, eternal, relentless, and unyielding. For the final time she spoke, her voice soft yet impossible to ignore. "Blackwood Ridge is mine, every soul, every secret, every fear. The hooks are eternal. And so am I. Remember that when you walk these streets, when you sleep in your beds, when you close your eyes, fear is not a choice. It is your inheritance, and I am its keeper." Pierce screamed, a sound swallowed by the lattice, his body and mind consumed by the hooks. Outside, the town remained silent, still, the fog rising, the shadows deepening, the lattice invisible but omnipresent. Blackwood Ridge was no longer just a town. It was a kingdom of fear, a cathedral of hooks, and Miriam Holloway, its eternal queen. And somewhere in the darkness, the whispers continued, reaching into every home. "Do you feel it? The hooks are patient. The hooks are eternal, and they are waiting for you.